Makowski. Okay. Uh, Hello, Michael Makowski. I'm the president and CEO of GINSA. Welcome, everybody. GINSA, we usually focus on national security issues, often issues that are in the Middle East, but we also have a program in Homeland Security. And there's been a very serious spike, as you all know, in anti-Semitism across the United States since October 7th, as there has been globally. One of the most disturbing places for the spike has been at American universities, especially at the so-called elite ones. It's been there for a while, but has become more pronounced and noticeable since October 7th. We've all seen videos of anti-Semitic graffiti, students intimidating Jewish students, attacks on Jews on campuses, and obviously very anti-Israel comments and statements. There's also been an issue of reports of declining percentage of Jewish students at Ivy League schools. The New York Times even reported that Jews comprise less than 10% of the student body at Harvard, which is down from 20% a generation ago. So we're with us today. We're very honored to have two distinguished guests. We have Representative Elise Stefanik, Republican from New York, and also Sandra Gerber, who is a distinguished GINSA fellow. Representative Stefanik represents the 21st District of New York. She is the fourth highest ranking Republican in the House of Representatives. She serves as the chair of the House Republican Conference and is a member of the House Committee on Education and Workforce. And also she is a member of the House Armed Services Committee and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. She was very well known before, but she has gotten particular notoriety and I would say kudos in many Jewish circles for questioning of these three university presidents in a hearing on December 5th. She's been an unapologetic supporter of Israel and its right to defend itself, and has been a leader in Congress spotlighting the rise in anti-Semitism in the United States following Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. She is an alum. I will add, we don't usually say this when we discuss speakers, but in this case, it's relevant. She's an alum of Harvard University. Sandra Gerber is a distinguished fellow with GINSA's Gemunder Center for Defense and Strategy. He is the chief executive officer. He is also the chief executive officer and chief investment officer of Hudson Bay Capital, a multi-billion-dollar investment firm. He is also a member of the United States Agency for International Development's Partnership for Peace Fund Advisory Board and an architect and of the Taylor Force Act. He is an alum of the University of Pennsylvania. Congress,
Kudos to Elise.
the Wharton School, I think, right, Sandra?
Well,
Look, Congresswoman Stefanik, it's terrific having you. And again, I think I'll just say for personally, the kudos on your line of questioning. I would say, who knew that a House Committee on Education and the Workforce could be so riveting? But I think, as you pointed out, that the clips, at least of your questioning, you said went really viral, that it was watched by over 1 billion people, and is the most watched congressional hearing ever. Let me just start with a broad question. Why do you think that is? Why did it get such attention so broadly?
Well, first, thank you to GINSA for hosting this panel. I have followed GINSA's work, and we work closely throughout my time in Congress. As our host pointed out today, not only do I serve in the Education Committee, but have been a leader on the Armed Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee on important national security issues throughout my past decade of service in elected office. So very proud to speak to this group today. To the committee hearing, which is the subject of the conversation today, Why do I think it's the most viewed testimony? It's because of the morally bankrupt answers from those university presidents. And just to bring you into the hearing a bit, this was a hearing that I encouraged my colleague Virginia Fox to chair. She's the chair of the committee. And as a Harvard alum, I had been in very close contact and paying very close attention to what was happening on Harvard's campus and the skyrocketing of anti-Semitic attacks, physical assaults, harassment of Jewish students on campus, and the university's abject failure not only to condemn Hamas's terrorist attacks, but to take disciplinary action against those anti-Semitic students. So the hearing, the clip that went viral was actually the last 3 minutes of the hearing. I had multiple rounds of questions where I did not get direct answers from the now former Harvard University president. And it was the most junior member of the committee who yielded me her remaining 3 minutes. And I thought, how can I ask this question in a moral, straightforward way to elicit a yes answer? Make it as easy as possible for these universities to answer yes to the question of, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your university's code of conduct? And to my astonishment, because I thought they were going to answer it correctly, despite their actions on campus, I thought because it was so straightforward, they all blew it. I mean, it was pathetic, and it was one after another. The groupthink of this radical, far left anti-Semitism that is deeply seated, unfortunately, the institutions was on display for the world to see. And as you saw in the clip, there was multiple opportunities for them to answer it correctly, and they failed. I knew at that moment it was going to be a historic hearing question. I will be honest, I did not anticipate that it would be 1 billion views in just a week. It's now well over 2 billion. It's the most viewed congressional testimony in history, as you pointed out. But it really set off an earthquake, and there's a lot of work that lies ahead that I look forward to delving into in this discussion, but that's a bit about the hearing. Hope, I think you're muted.
I'm muted. Sorry about that. Well, thank you for that. I'd like you to continue a little bit before I turn to Sander, and then I'll ask Sander some questions. But I'd like you to talk about that hearing. You said you had some more things you wanted to
Yes,
share. That.
sure. So that hearing, there are a lot more steps that need to take place after that hearing, clearly. It set off an earthquake and a long overdue reckoning, and there's multiple policy issues at play here. First, U.S. taxpayer dollars go to these higher ed institutions. We have an oversight responsibility of members of Congress to be good stewards and to oversee those taxpayer dollars. We also saw, in the case of all three of those campuses that testified, get foreign funds, and foreign funds that are flowing to these Middle Eastern studies programs from countries like Qatar, and very concerned about the conditions of the requirements of receiving those foreign funds. And it provides conditions for the curricula that's taught, the professors, and foreign dollars flowing into student groups to perpetuate and to skyrocket this anti-Semitic rhetoric, anti-Semitic actions that are continuing to be on the rise, unfortunately, on these college campuses. In addition, you mentioned in your opening statement about the decline in the number of Jewish students. That, I believe, is also going to be an important part of our investigation moving forward. And these offices of DEI, in the case of Harvard, prior to the October 7th terrorist attacks, there had been hundreds of students, so this is in the past few years, who had reached out to the Office of DEI at Harvard concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism. Again, this is prior to the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks. And yet there was no response from the Office of DEI. So this inherent anti-Semitism inherently in these offices of DEI needs to be rooted out. But there are so many aspects to this that this investigation, it's going to be robust. There's been document requests issued to these higher ed institutions. There will be follow-up hearings and ultimately a report and legislative solutions and proposals that are pushed forward by the committee to start the process of rooting out this rot.
I'll just say, and then I'm going to ask Sander, this impresses me generally as a bipartisan issue, right? I know for personal reasons, I know left-wing Jews who maybe they might not see eye to eye, with me on certain things about Israel, but on this issue about the anti-Semitism on the campuses, infuriates them. I don't know if that's been your experience also.
If that's directed at me,
Yes. Yeah.
yes. So there were a number of resolutions. One, we called for the Congress, overwhelmingly bipartisan. It passed on suspension, which means it needs votes from both parties overwhelmingly. It was a sense of Congress calling for the resignation of those three university presidents because of their just morally bankrupt testimony. In addition, we have passed resolutions condemning anti-Semitism. I will point out that it was very disheartening to see over 100 Democrats oppose that. However, many, many Democrats voted in support of that. It is important to address this issue as a moral one, and that's what my question did, which is why I think it is people across all political affiliations who are saying that the hearing was so important and that there is a long overdue reckoning in higher ed.
Yeah. I never thought context would be a dirty word, but it became that way after
Huh.
this. Uh, Sandra, let me ask you, because you and I have, well, talked a long time over this, but I know you've taken a personal interest in Columbia. I think you've had some kids that have gone there. But where do you think this is coming from on campuses? I know it's been an interest of yours for a long time.
Well, first, I'd like to thank Elise. I think the Jewish community, but also broader America, needs to thank Elise for calling the moral question. And she looks positively angelic with the lights above her head.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's because she called the moral question. She brought the moral clarity to where we have sunk with all the various isms that have been going on. America is the melting pot, the great melting pot, and that's the strength of our society. And the divisions that have occurred in the drive to support minority groups, now it's actually gone so far as to attack the Jewish group. But this is not out of the blue. This has been going on for decades. In fact, just 4 years ago, Yale passed a resolution signed on by 50 different student organizations, including the Jewish Law Students Organization, that Israel is conducting an ethnic cleansing and a genocide. That was 4 years ago. But back in 1970, after Israel won the 1967 war, the Soviets were worried about losing a toehold in the Middle East. And so they set up, as they adopted counter-revolutionary movements throughout the world in the 70s, one of those they adopted was the PLO. And they trained the PLO in propaganda. And the original KGB documents, which were formulated in 1970, set up the exact same language that you hear today on the college campus. That Israel's the occupiers, they're Nazis, ethnic cleansing, genocide. That's why Zionism is racism, came from the Soviets in 1975. That's why Mahmoud Abbas got his doctorate in 1982 in Moscow from the KGB think tank. His doctoral thesis was the Nazi-Zionist collaboration, how the Zionists assisted the Nazis in sending European Jewry to the gas chambers, which seems crazy, but in his analysis, the Zionists knew that European Jewry would not move to Israel. So they wanted to both scare the rest of worldwide Jewry to move to the nation state of Israel, but also to allow the floodgates to open for immigrants into Israel. So they figured that by helping the Nazis with the Holocaust, that could help build the state of Israel. And of course, it seems crazy, but Abbas published it in 1984 in a book and then republished it in 2011. And that's why his language relating the Jews to genocide, ethnic cleansing, which he's used from time to time in his speeches around the world, have been now adopted through the BDS movement actually to the college campus. And so the language that you're hearing now is not something that just came because of October 7th. It's not something that just came 10 years ago. This is really 50 years. But how do you convince the world that the Nazi victims are in fact Nazi oppressors? Difficult. What the Soviets had 130 media outlets, mostly in the lesser developed world, of more strength. And if you repeat the message again and again and again, people will believe it. That's propaganda. Now, as Americans, we don't fully appreciate propaganda in the same way. We have left media, we have right media, but we have free media. When you're in a closed society, and most of the world is a closed society, and you hear the same message repeated again and again and again, you believe it. Particularly, I think that's why the message now has grown, because as you see the pictures of the damage in Gaza, now it sparks a light. Aha, it really is true. There's an ethnic cleansing and genocide going on. And so all Jews support Israel, and Israel is the Jewish state. So Israel and the Jews are oppressors. And I think that that's kind of the background that takes us to where we are today.
Yeah, by the way, I would commend our audience to read Bret Stephens in today's New York Times, and he addresses this charge about that Israel is a settler, the Israelis are settler colonists, which has also been a phrase that has come up a lot in these campuses, which I thought, did a very effective job of dispelling. Representative Stefanik, let me go back to you about before we get to, and you already alluded to it about tax and certain things that how to address this problem. I want to ask just an immediate question, which is that since the hearing, I know there have been your committee that you're on has demanded certain documents. Let's just take from Harvard, and I believe the deadline passed on that. Could you tell us, where things are? Did they provide? I saw a report that they provided only like pretty much public documents. They didn't really answer, but why don't you tell us what's really going on your follow-up with the committee hearing on that?
Yes, thank you for that question. As I talked about, the hearing was historically important, of course, but it's the work ahead that's going to be the most important work. So the document requests were issued for Harvard, Penn, and MIT in detail. And again, we have oversight responsibilities as a congressional committee, particularly when it comes to those U.S. taxpayer dollar funds, federal accreditation, and also making sure that these universities are following their own codes of conduct, which they are not in these cases. And we have a responsibility to protect Jewish students on campus. Harvard has not been forthcoming. The documents that have been turned over have been almost every single one are publicly available. And what's even more concerning is yet they redacted in the documents, in the copies they sent in. So these are publicly available documents on their website, yet they issued redactions to what they turned into the committee. It did not address the very specific requests as it was laid out by the Congressional Committee. And the committee will not hesitate to use our subpoena authority. And again, there's some back and forth going on with Harvard right now and the committee on what adequately will respond to our document requests and what is not an adequate response. So I think there'll be news on that in the coming days and weeks here as we continue to, again, assert our responsibility. In the case of Penn and MIT, that is ongoing as well. Harvard is front of the mind because the document request has been so detailed and because there is just so much interest by the American people on that issue. What is most concerning to me is we have seen, particularly in the case of Penn, but also in the case of Harvard, that while the heads of the universities have been changed out, we're still seeing rampant anti-Semitism. You saw at Harvard, for example, they appointed a professor who has multiple anti-Semitic statements on record to chair the task force on anti-Semitism. He has since stepped down from that position, but I called them out for that. We have seen at Penn, and I'm sure Sander is paying close attention to this as an alumni there. We have seen anti-Semitic cartoons. We have seen anti-Semitism from professors and a failure from these institutions to root out this very existential and just a horrible, heinous root that has taken place in these higher ed institutions. So more to come here, but we're going to hold firm and not hesitate to issue these subpoenas.
And
I would just like to add to what Elise said, because Columbia seems to have gotten off the hook a little bit. A former dean of Columbia told me he's convinced that there's anti-Semitism endemic within the institution. Columbia law students just the other day, they blocked a Jewish group, or the Columbia Senate, Student Senate, blocked law students against anti-Semitism, a group. There were 9 groups applying. They only blocked 1. If you're not an official group, you can't meet on campus. You can't have, a university email. The charge was they didn't like the definition of anti-Semitism, which was the IHRC, the State Department definition for anti-Semitism. That was the charge, that this was the only organization denied. Also, on Columbia's campus, it's obvious that students will protest across university campuses in favor of Hamas, but Columbia went one step further and had a protest in favor of the Houthis.
Yeah.
Yemen, turn the ship around. It's great. Like, when my daughter told me this,
We have a clip of the
I couldn't
video
wait.
for your
Okay, go ahead.
request, Sandra. There. Okay, thanks, Ethan. Okay,
Like, how crazy could this get?
yeah. And let me actually, just on that, with Representative Stefanik, on the issue of Columbia, wasn't the president, she was also supposed to be one of the she was supposed to be one of the witnesses, but she couldn't do it for scheduling. And actually, it's to her benefit that she missed this, obviously, it seems like.
Well, I think it's important to note that it's not just the 3 universities. We also have investigations into other higher ed institutions, and Columbia is on that list because of their failure to protect Jewish students and their failure to combat anti-Semitism on campus. There will be more public events to come, and Columbia has been egregious. Columbia has failed, and unfortunately, other higher institutions have failed. So there will be more work, more hearings in the future with other higher ed institutions who are invited or compelled to appear before Congress. And the list is lengthy. The other piece I wanted to point out is the committee set up immediately following the hearing basically a website for students to send in issues that are happening on their campuses or attacks on their campuses. And we have been overwhelmed by the sheer number. And we are going through each and every one of those. And every higher ed institution is going to get a document request related to those anti-Semitic attacks, harassment, etc. on campus. So Columbia, while they were not in that first hearing, make no mistake that it is going to be part of this broader investigation. And it's very disheartening because, as I said, it's not just those university presidents who are morally bankrupt. This is going to take a full-fronted, long-term, it needs to be a priority over the long term to root this out.
Yeah, by the way, Sander, just for the audience, so these are pro-Houthi demonstrators. Just the Houthi slogan is "God is great, death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews, victory to Islam." I guess I could only give them a little credit because the Iranian slogan about death to America, death to Israel, at least the Houthis say God is great, which I guess you got to give them some credit. But otherwise, it's a pretty negative motto. Let me ask you, Representative Stefanik, just to go back to something you said before we get to some new issues. You said about these subpoenas to Harvard and maybe some of these other universities. Could you explain what the documents you're looking for is exactly? What are you subpoenaing them are, and what are the consequences to the universities if they don't comply fully with those?
Sure. So the Harvard request is very detailed. So number one, it is all instances and reports, because they do have reports that students have made on campus regarding all these anti-Semitic attacks. We know they have those on file, not only what those numbers are, what those instances are, but what action was taken by the university. Has any action been taken disciplinary against people who have committed criminals who have committed those acts? And we've seen that with our own eyes, some of the footage that came out with the physical assaulting and harassment at Harvard Law School, for example. In addition, the document request all internal communications of the Harvard Corporation in how they have addressed anti-Semitism on campus, as well as how they addressed this crisis of leadership after the president's appearance in front of the committee. Of course, they have not turned those over yet. In addition, the foreign funding piece was included in the document request. All sources of foreign funding up of north of $50,000, which is actually very closely tied to the legislation we passed, the Deterrent Act. Harvard hasn't responded adequately to any of these very specific policy requests for a legislative purpose. Because of that back and forth, the committee chair has the right to issue a subpoena. And if Harvard does not comply with the subpoena, the next step is being held in contempt. And that has happened before. And it's very, very egregious. And our expectation, and Harvard has said specifically that they will comply with our investigation, and we're going to hold them to it. If not, we will not hesitate to hold them in contempt of Congress. But again, these are very specific policy requests, oversight requests. That's our responsibility as members of Congress to oversee U.S. taxpayer dollars that are funding these institutions. So stay tuned, because there will be news made on this in the coming months.
You know, one thing that struck me about this, and there's a lot that struck obviously me and a lot of other people about this. One of the things I noticed is leading up to the hearing, I was following Bill Ackman on Twitter, which I didn't do before all this came out, and before 10/7. And he had offered to, because the night before your hearing, they showed at Harvard that 45-minute video, whatever you want to call it, of the horrors. And it's a condensed version of the horrors that Hamas committed on 10/7. And we have all those videos a lot because the Hamas terrorists videotaped it. And I was told by a senior IDF general when I was in Israel a few months ago that actually the original video is actually 2 or 3 hours long, and actually the worst part isn't even shown. But anyway, Ackman had offered to, so Claudine Gay, the then president of Harvard, could go attend. He offered then a flyer on a private jet to Washington so she can make your hearing the next morning. And it would have seemed to me that would have been a good thing for her to do, just from a PR perspective. She could have said, oh, the night before I just saw this video. I'm very concerned. Obviously, what I saw on 10/7 was horrendous, etc. But she didn't even think that would be advantageous. And and it just gives me a sense that the context that there's a bubble that some of these people at these universities live in, where they don't even care. I mean, it doesn't even matter. You don't even say, oh, I saw the video. It was terrible. We're going to do this. And it just shows you how much I really care about what happens to the Jews and et cetera. She didn't even think there'd be any benefit to her from a PR standpoint, which to me suggested how disconnected they are from a way maybe a lot of other Americans might think about what happened on 10/7. I don't know.
So number one, I have seen the video, and I encouraged our speaker to work with the Israeli embassy to air that video for members of Congress. And I will tell you, just watching the horrors of that video, I will never forget it. I was breaking down while watching it, particularly as a mother of, I have a 2-year-old son. Just my heart grieves for these Israeli families and their loss of loved ones, of innocent elderly, babies, children, women. It's horrific. And it was shameful that the presidents of the previously most elite universities in the world, not just in the United States, and America is usually the home of the most elite higher ed institutions, many of which were founded on moral leadership. Let's not forget that. They're so far removed and have fallen so far of that moral leadership. So her refusal is shameful. To watch that video, which was important for leaders to see around the world. You also said something that's really important is how woefully out of touch they are with the American people. You put up three of my constituents, a farmer, let's say, a hardworking manufacturing worker, a suburban mom, in those same asking them the same question at the hearing, they know how to answer the question from a moral perspective without hesitation. And that will reflect the American character in support of Israel and support of what is morally right. And yet, university presidents are not able to answer a very straightforward moral question. That, to me, is one of the reasons why that resonated across the country, because everyday Americans and everyday people around the world saw how wrong those answers were. And you're seeing it in the application numbers too. If you look at the application numbers have plummeted for these Ivy League schools, where previously they would go up year after year, the number of students competing for those slots. So, there's just so much work to do, and I'm very dismayed, but what I am very proud of is that this is going to lead to lasting change and the need for people to come together to root out this rot.
So
I
let's
would
get to
just
that.
add that
Sander, please.
the irony is that the motto of Penn is leges sine moribus veni, laws without morals are vain. Laws without morals are vain. And it's not just the university presidents, and I'm so glad Elise called the question on them, but their legal advisors also. In the shrine of the First Amendment, which doesn't really apply on the college campus anyway, they couldn't distinguish between boundaries. And I think the fact that we now have students on college campuses protesting in favor of terrorist movements is a reflection of a rot within our society. I don't think it's pervasive throughout all of society, but I think there are segments of our society that have lost a moral sensibility, and it's something that we need to correct. And I think that Elise's efforts, targeting the elite academic centers, hopefully will inject some sensibility that might begin to turn around our society.
And I just want to comment, Sander made an important point on free speech. It is offensive to me as an alum of Harvard, I have watched Harvard cancel conservative speakers year after year. And yet the only vociferous defense I have heard from both Harvard and Penn, which rank the two lowest schools when it comes to protections for free speech, their most vociferous defense for free speech is only when it calls for the genocide of Jews. And that is a double standard in terms of they cancel, as I said, conservative speakers and pro-Israel speakers, and yet they use that as their defense, why it depends on the context, which is a morally bankrupt and pathetic and unacceptable answer. So this notion of these schools are defending free speech, people see right through that because that's not what is happening on these college campuses.
So let's get to what we could do about it now, I think, and let me ask you this, but picking up something Sander just said about these protests. There was an interesting piece in Tablet magazine the other day by Tony Butteron, and it talked about basically maybe one of the dirty little secrets of some of these universities is that they have a lot of international students that generally have that pay full tuition, unlike a lot of Americans. And it helps also meet some of their internal diversity quotas. And this issue came up. It didn't get enough attention, but I wanted to ask you, Representative Stefanik, because this is an issue for instance, with the MIT, there was an issue that there was a bunch of students that were protesting a pro-Hamas demonstration that was blocking students from the movement. I might have been disrupting classes also. And the president or the university said something to the effect of, yes, but they're conscious basically of, I don't remember exact quote, basically they're conscious of the immigration status of some of these protesters. And it raises the question whether we have in the country pro-Hamas demonstrators who are not American citizens, who are here on special visas like student visas. Are these universities, this statement by MIT suggesting they're protecting these students. because then if because they don't want to get them deported. Are these universities protecting these foreign students who are Hamas supporters? And is there something that the Congress could do something about? And should we be deporting some of these sort of students?
Yes, the answer is yes to your last question, and Congress does have a role in this. That's why doing this investigation is so important to get all of the information. I referenced this at the earlier part of this conversation, the foreign dollars that are flowing in.
Yeah.
These I don't even call them protests, but these pro-Hamas events are, I believe, very well organized by adversaries of the United States and adversaries of Israel. And I am very concerned about those foreign dollars flowing into our higher ed communities. And it's not just the student groups, but it's also the departments, and specifically the Middle Eastern Studies Department. This is why the legislation, the Deterrent Act that we passed with bipartisan support, I will add, it was a Republican-led bill, but we got a number of Democrats to vote for it, is a greater disclosure requirement and greater transparency for these higher ed institutions when they receive any foreign dollars above $50,000, because we deserve to know that. But I am very deeply concerned about non-US citizens who are perpetrating this pro-Hamas and threatening our American students on campus.
Do you
And you
think?
see on certain campuses, you see active protest movements, and other campuses, it's quiet. In certain countries, or cities, it's active, and other cities, not active at all. There's an organizational movement behind this that has a leadership, and we need to focus on that leadership and defund and defeat that leadership, and then educate the masses. I think that one thing be very easy for colleges to do is to educate on the Hamas charter to the students. Hamas charter says Christians and Jews who don't live under Islamic subjugation deserve to die. Why can't they educate everyone? They all talk, all the college, we're going to educate. They don't educate. Why not educate at least why not educate the Yemen slogan? I mean, these slogans are great, but when you speak to the guy on the street, they don't really know what river and what sea you're talking about. They have no idea. They're just following because they want an ism to latch onto, to show that they're doing something. They don't have a real understanding of what's going on.
Well, I think Sandra, that gets to the point. I mean, people need to understand these aren't necessarily pro-Palestinian; they're pro-Hamas rallies. And as Sandra just raised, I mean, it's as if there were pro-ISIS rallies in America, and these are jihadi groups, anti-Semitic, anti-non. Actually, even Muslims that don't agree with them, they feel the same way about, and certainly anti-American. It's concerning, I think, to our homeland security, this, and to see this. And I wonder, do you think, Representative Stefanik, do you think law enforcement, and I include the FBI in this, are they watching who are these people? Because again, we should have freedom of speech, but when you have rallies supporting jihadi genocidal terrorists backed by Iran, seems to me that it really impacts our homeland security. And I wonder if our authorities are really watching who these people are exactly.
Well, certainly they need to be on high alert. And I'll tell you, the Intelligence Committee, because I do sit on that committee as well, that has oversight over our intelligence agencies, there is absolutely a foreign nexus to this. As Sander talked about, you have very well organized groups, well organized to the point where the day after the horrific terrorist attacks against Israel, you had literally a guidebook on apps, on tablets, on actions for these pro-Hamas groups to take on US soil at institutions in America of higher learning. So it is well funded, it's well organized. We need to go after the entity and the adversary that funds this. And that includes foreign adversaries as well, to not allow this to happen and to defund all aspects of this.
Yeah.
So yes, But I will tell you, one of the questions that I asked, and they actually didn't answer it correctly, but we know from the FBI, for example, and I have major criticisms of the FBI in so many ways, but the data shows, and you know this, that the number one hate crime in the United States is anti-Semitic hate crimes. And I asked that of the university presidents, and I told them the answer because they did not know the answer accurately, but that's data provided to us by the intelligence community, by the FBI. So they are seeing this nationwide. They have the data and the instances to back up that data. And they need to make sure that they are very focused on this national security and homeland security threat.
By the way, and of course, coupled with a porous border in the South, you worry about who's coming in these countries, even though we don't know that don't have visas, that could cause other problems. And we have had people that we've stopped that were on the terror watch list.
Hundreds, not just
yeah.
on our southern border. There have been individuals on our northern border, recently an Iranian national attempting to come through our northern border. People on our terrorist watch list, hundreds have come across this open border. So of course, that's a national security threat.
So let me ask you, let's things about, you mentioned a couple times, Representative Stefanik, the issue of, let's say, I mean, there are a number of ways to, it seems to, that the U.S. government could pressure these universities to do the right thing to ensure an environment that's safe for Jewish students at a minimum, among other things. There's a lot of federal grant dollars that go to universities. There are tax benefits, including that their endowments, the way their endowments are not taxed. What do you think is going to be the best ways that the Congress and government could really make sure these universities do the right thing?
So number one, I think it's important to go back to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and the executive order taken by President Trump that provides protection for Jewish students when it comes to Title VI. We need to make sure that that is implemented, and I have concerns about the failure of this administration to adequately ensure those protections from the Department of Education, but that's one piece, and that is an executive order that I strongly supported, and I'm very proud that President Trump put that into place. Number two, the tax status of these universities. They have tremendous tax benefits. That's something that we ought to look at as a Congress. Number three, the taxpayer dollars. We're talking over nearly $1 billion in the case of Harvard, for example, on an annual basis. And yet it's propping up an institution that has perpetrated and allowed the skyrocketing of anti-Semitism on campus. I also think looking at and abolishing these departments on DEI, which are inherently anti-Semitic. I gave the example at Harvard where hundreds of Jewish students reached out and there was zero response from the university, not even a response when it came to students who were concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism on campus. And then the foreign funding piece is absolutely important as well, as we laid out previously in the conversation. And then I would say broader than the higher ed, I'm very concerned about TikTok, for example, and the anti-Semitism that is continuing to grow among TikTok users, particularly young Americans. And I've supported a full ban of TikTok because it's a communist Chinese spyware is what I consider it. We have a no TikTok policy in my office, and I think increasingly it is allowing our adversaries to share propaganda that is fundamentally not only anti-Israel and anti-Semitic, but anti-American. So those are some of the policy prescriptions moving forward.
And what do you think, like, and then I'll turn back to Sander, but what committees you have to work with to get these? Because is that all under your committee's jurisdiction, or it seems like this is going to deal with a bunch of congressional committees? I guess you have to work with, how does this happen, I guess is the question.
You work with a bunch of congressional committees. So on the defunding piece, that would be Appropriations Committee, and that will be very important. That's oftentimes where those policy riders are when we're defunding, and we're choosing what our priorities for US taxpayer dollars are. A lot of this will be in the Education Committee when it comes to higher ed. When it comes to holding these government agencies accountable, that'll be all sorts of different committees in Congress. I will say that it's important also to hold agencies like UNRWA and defund agencies that are not only perpetrating anti-Semitism, but they have individuals who are committing the terrorist acts with Hamas that are a part of UNRWA, and that would be in the Foreign Affairs Committee. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. All of our committees in Congress are very focused on different aspects of this, and this hearing just set off this earthquake that was long overdue.
I would like to add to what Elise said.
Please.
It's not just an earthquake regarding anti-Semitism. It's an earthquake regarding the wokeness of the college campuses, especially the elite college campuses, that the attitudes and political perspectives have gone in one direction. And there has to be a recognition where it's gone, and then we have to take steps to bring it back. So I think Elise articulated very important steps that should be taken, but we have to go more than just badgering them. We need to also provide, I think, a roadmap for what positive steps they have to take in terms of educating their student bodies, in terms of recruiting appropriate professors, monitoring what's going on in the classrooms, and frankly making sure that there are best standards in terms of codes of conduct on the university campus.
Sander, Representative Stefanik mentioned TikTok, and I have to say, I don't partake, and I agree. I wouldn't want my family to partake either, or anyone in our circle, given what it does. But we've heard this a lot over and over again. I mean, this was an issue before 10/7. We've heard it a lot, how it's corrupting the way a lot of young people think about Israel and the region. And what do you think we should do about TikTok?
Well, I'm blessed with 6 daughters, and one of my daughters became an addict on TikTok, and we had to wrench her away from it, and it wasn't easy, and she's a much better person for it now. As we know, there's an addictive aspect to these social media platforms, and TikTok, like the other social media platforms, by their data strategy, are going to keep pinging you with the same messages again and again and again. But as Elise mentioned, TikTok is even more pernicious because all of your data is being stored for, social cyber attacks that might occur 20 years down the road when the Chinese or some nefarious actor has, bad video about you when you become, a star congresswoman or something. Not that would ever happen to Elise. So it's a big problem, and this goes well beyond the anti-Semitism argument. But I think that the TikTok and the other social media platforms, because they target with messages, actually prevent that dialogue, that discourse that's so important for our very democracy.
Yes, I want to add to that. I was flipping through this. I recently received a presentation on TikTok and just the concerning aspects of this. And there was a recent poll. I'm sure you saw this. I know this is small font but I'll try to encapsulate it. It basically tracks the support for Israel versus the support for Hamas by demographic age groups. And you see, for example, those 65 age plus, 96% strongly support Israel. When it comes to support for Hamas, it's only 4%. You compare that with 18 to 24-year-olds, it's 50-50, which is absolutely concerning. But that demographic group gets the majority of their news, the vast majority of it, on TikTok. TikTok suppresses pro-Israel and frankly pro-America information, and it increases the likelihood that individuals see anti-Israel, anti-American propaganda from our adversaries. So this TikTok piece, and there's been different proposals, often both parties actually, there are leaders in both parties on this issue. the importance of some type of ban for TikTok. And I'll tell you, as a parent, luckily my child is only 2.5, so we haven't gotten to this age of social media yet with him, but I know it's something that parents are spending a lot of time thinking about to make sure that their kids are not at risk. And of course, you saw that very high profile hearing with all of the mental health challenges and very tragic stories. And I have constituents in my district, for example, who have been impacted and have lost loved ones as a result of just what's been happening on these websites. So this is one small piece, but it's an important piece as well as everything else we're doing.
Yeah. Let me ask you on the administration. By the way, I'll just add, I know Sanders' family. I don't know Representative Stefanik's family, but I'm sure it's the case with him. But he's blessed with a great wife, and all his kids are
Thank you. And one
terrific,
son.
terrific family. Do you, Representative Stefanik, how do you view the administration? One question, or I'm just trying to look at some of the questions we've been getting in, asked about the Secretary of Education. How is the secretary responding to some of these? And I guess I have a general concern. If this was right wing, white supremacy, supremacists that were marching, and that's what if you had a massacre, God forbid, of 1,200 blacks, and the next day in this country you had an eruption of rallies on behalf of the white supremacists, it would be a national disgrace. Everyone would know it. And you'd have the president, the vice president, everybody talking about it a lot. And it would be awful if such an event occurred and if there was such a reaction, obviously. Haven't seen the same on this. There's been some rhetoric, but I don't hear the same demonization of the pro-Hamas ralliers. And I wonder if the federal government, our national leaders, not just in Congress, but the president, the vice president, others could be speaking more forcefully about this issue. And I say this even though I think President Biden has, responded extremely well, much better than I would have expected. Certainly been very supportive of Israel since October 7th. His administration has maybe changed in recent weeks a bit, but I think I give him a lot of kudos on how he responded to the event, going to Israel, giving weapons and so on. But on the anti-Semitism, I haven't seen the same vigorous response.
Well, in the days following the hearing, you saw the White House, the press podium, condemn the testimony. You did not see the President of the United States, and it was an opportunity for the president, particularly because he was a professor at Penn and is so closely tied. He failed to condemn the testimony of those university presidents. We did hear from the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, at the Hanukkah celebration, which it was a very difficult Hanukkah, just given the absolute atrocities that Israel has gone through because of the Hamas terrorists, but also this concerning rise of anti-Semitism. So I know this was just a challenging Hanukkah for many, many reasons for Jewish families around the world and in our own country, but particularly for families grieving their loved ones in Israel. So you did hear from the second gentleman. You did not hear enough from the president. And I will tell you, I have concerns about the Department of Education and the Biden administration not addressing this seriously when it came to the executive order that Trump put into place, providing protections for Jewish students. And we're not seeing that. You also have the Secretary of Education, who just earlier today, there's reporting that he is embracing anti-Semitic comments and refused to condemn. And his resignation was called for by Virginia Fox. I echo and support that call for his resignation, but there needs to be moral leadership from the Secretary of Education and from the president on this issue. It has not been enough. And I will tell you, it is absurd that you have a president of the United States issue a veto threat for aid to Israel, a clean package of the number he requested for aid to Israel. They actually issued a veto threat. And you saw we did not pass it on suspension, and we're going to work to continue to get support to pass it. I voted in support of all the Israel aid packages, but that veto threat at such a time of need is really shocking to me, and we've never seen anything like that from a U.S. president, and I was very, very disappointed, as I know the world was disappointed, and Israel was disappointed to see that veto threat as well.
Yeah. By the way, this
Mike,
is
I would like to add that, the administration did some good things at the beginning, but they have certainly countenanced and given fuel to the charge that Israel is using disproportionate force. And, they're not highlighting that of the 25,000, if you believe Hamas people have been killed, over 40% of them have been combatants. And in fact, the administration has been pushing somewhat vocally for a cessation to Israel trying to defend itself in time of war. And as opposed to Roosevelt, before, with the Soviets, with the with the Nazis, he pushed down the protesters. He said, "You're wrong, you're bunk." Biden is not saying these people are wrong. I haven't heard him come out and say protesting in favor of the Houthis is bad. I haven't heard him saying protesting in favor of Hamas is bad. So I think there's really a lot more. The president has a pulpit, and he should use that pulpit. And I have not heard that language, certainly for the domestic audience.
And
Yeah.
there's a question related to this in the chat. The administration's executive action to prevent Israelis from getting U.S. visas. Meanwhile, they leave the border wide open, but importantly, they're doing nothing to reject the visas for students who are openly supporting Hamas on campus. That was a really good question by one of the participants today. So what are my thoughts on that? My thoughts are that as it shows this administration's position for the world to see. I strongly oppose the administration's approach, and it's just an example of we are not seeing the leadership we need to see on the world stage, but even in our own country of this president.
But we see the executive order designating 4 settlers as terrorists, which, we don't like settler terrorism. That's terrible. That's bad. But the Palestinian Authority pays to kill people $350 million a year. They pay 36,000 people monthly payments because of attacks against Israel, which is a genocidal program that the Palestinian Authority has. And yet the administration keeps trying to reach out and even suggests that the Palestinian Authority, which is conducting this program of genocide against Israel, should now take over in Gaza.
Yeah,
Exactly.
no, it's a very good point. By the way, I just want to add, I think while there's an opportunity for the President Biden to be and Vice President Harris to be far more vocal about this, I also think the same about, former President Trump, who's leading the polls for the Republican nomination, Nikki Haley, and maybe they said it. I honestly haven't noticed as much. I guess I just look more a little bit.
Oh, they have. President Trump says it at almost every single rally, and the media does not accurately portray and don't run a lot of the clips of what he says. But he has referenced this hearing. I've been at the rally. He's done it in almost every single early state he's appeared in when it comes to combating anti-Semitism and how disgraceful the testimony of those university presidents were. And his strong record in terms of the Abraham Accords, supporting Israel, the maximum pressure campaign against Iran, this Title VI executive order, that is a very strong record. And it's one of the reasons that I believe he continues to lead in the polls.
Yeah. Look, I think, this gets to a broader question, which Jinsa has written about and spoke about many times. Also, we've been disappointed by that we haven't seen really retaliatory action against Iran for its plotting to kill American citizens on American soil, including former U.S. government officials. We think I'll speak for myself, the response so far in the administration to all these attacks on U.S. forces in the region before October 7th, and then there's just been a lot more, we think has been very weak. And we think the U.S. needs to hit back Iran and make it much more strongly inside Iran. So it's much more painful to the Iranians. So they stop attacking our forces. So I think we have to protect American citizens better, both here at home and abroad. Look, I know we're coming. We have 1 minute left. I just want to, first of all, I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank you, Sander, for your words, and Representative Stefanik. I know I speak for a lot of folks on this webinar when I say thank you very much for your terrific leadership on combating anti-Semitism everywhere, but particularly with highlighting and trying to address the rampant anti-Semitism. Frankly, it's also anti-Americanism on these college campuses. So we thank you and we wish you good luck in pursuing that going forward. So thank you and for joining us.
Thank you so much, Sander. Great to see you. Thank you to Jinsa for hosting this, and we will keep you apprised as this investigation continues forward, as we have future hearings. And I appreciate everyone's interest in this really important issue.
Thanks,
All right.
Lee.
Well,
Thanks.
thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for having us. We look forward to having you back.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.